The courtroom fell silent when they read his name. Rannick stood at attention, his four arms locked behind his back, his scaled skin flushing dark purple with shame. Around him, other Valorian officers whispered to each other. He could hear their words clearly. Reassigned to a human unit. What a waste. What a disgrace. The judge finished reading the transfer orders and looked at Rannick with something that might have been pity. You will report to Forward Operating Base Sentinel within 3 days. You are assigned to Human Unit 77 under Sergeant Diana Webb. Dismissed. Rannick walked out of the courtroom without looking at anyone. His claws clicked against the polished floor with each step. 7 feet tall, covered in natural armor, trained since childhood to be a perfect warrior. And now they were sending him to babysit humans. Small, soft, fragile creatures who lived barely 100 years and broke so easily that he knew why this was happening. He had questioned his commanding officer during a mission briefing. He had suggested a better strategy. He had been right, but that did not matter. Valorian officers did not tolerate challenges from younger warriors. His quarters were nearly empty when he arrived to pack. He had few possessions. Warriors did not need comfort. He was folding his spare uniform when the door opened behind him. So the rumors are true. Rannick turned to find Admiral Yenna standing in his doorway. She was old, her scales faded to pale gray, but her eyes were still sharp. She had been his mentor for years. She had taught him everything he knew about combat and honor. Admiral, he said stiffly, I assume you have heard about my punishment. Yenna walked into the room and sat on his bunk without asking permission. Punishment? Is that what you think this is? What else would you call being sent to fight alongside humans? The old admiral smiled, and something in that smile made Rannick uncomfortable. I called in every favor I had to get you this assignment. Every single one. There were 12 other officers competing for your spot. Rannick stared at her. That cannot be true. You are young and proud and foolish, Yenna said. All the things I was at your age. Someday you will understand what I have given you today. Someday you will thank me. She left before he could respond. The transport to Forward Operating Base Sentinel took 2 days. Rannick spent most of that time alone, studying what little information he could find about Human Unit 77. The record surprised him. They were the most decorated unit in the entire coalition. They had fought in more campaigns than any other squad. Their survival rate was impossibly high. There must be some mistake, he thought. Humans were weak. Everyone knew this. The base itself was nothing special. A battered station floating at the edge of contested space, scarred by old battles and patched with mismatched metal. Rannick expected chaos. He expected disorder. Humans were known for their lack of discipline. Instead, he found soldiers. Real soldiers. They moved with purpose. They spoke with respect. And they came from every species in the coalition. Drellians, Cathrani, Morvians, and yes, humans. All working together like a single organism. A young human woman approached him as he stepped off the transport. She was short, barely reaching his chest, with dark skin and calm brown eyes. A scar ran across her jaw and down her neck. You must be Rannick, she said. I'm Sergeant Diana Webb. Welcome to Unit 77. Rannick looked down at her. I am ready to receive my assignment. Webb studied him for a moment, her face showing nothing. Then she reached in her pocket and pulled out a small package. A meal pack. Eat, she said. We move out at dawn. You fight with Fireteam 3. That was it. No ceremony. No formal greeting. No acknowledgement of his medals, or his training, or his status as a Valorian warrior. She simply handed him food and walked away. Rannick found the barracks assigned to him and chose a bunk near the wall. The room was shared with other alien soldiers, most of them veterans. An enormous Drellian sat on a bunk across from him, cleaning a weapon that looked too small for his massive hands. The Drellian looked like a bipedal rhinoceros, gray and thick with muscle. He caught Rannick staring and grinned, showing teeth the size of daggers. First day, the Drellian asked. Yes, I am Gorth. 11 years with the humans. Rannick could not hide his surprise. 11 years? Why would you stay so long? Gorth's grin faded into something softer, something that looked almost like reverence. You do not understand yet. You will. That night, Rannick lay awake in his bunk, staring at the ceiling. Through the thin walls, he could hear humans in the next room. They were playing cards and laughing about something. Someone told a joke, and the others groaned. Someone else started singing badly, and the rest joined in. Such strange creatures. So small, so breakable, so completely unaware of how fragile they were. Rannick rolled onto his side and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would be his first mission with the humans. He would show them what a real warrior could do. He would protect them from their own weakness, that he would prove that he did not belong here. But somewhere in the back of his mind, Admiral Yenna's words echoed in the darkness. Someday you will understand what I have given you. That he fell asleep wondering what the old admiral could possibly have meant. The dropship shook hard as it entered the atmosphere of the moon called dust. Rannick gripped the overhead rail with two of his arms and checked his weapon with the other two. Around him, the soldiers of Fire Team 3 sat strapped into their seats, their faces calm despite the turbulence. The mission briefing had been simple. A Sketh supply depot hidden in a canyon. Get in, destroy the supplies, get out. Easy work for a warrior of his caliber. Rannick looked at the humans around him. They were checking their gear with practiced hands, adjusting straps, testing equipment. None of them seemed nervous. The young one, Danny Okonkwo, caught him staring and smiled. "First drop with us?" Danny asked. "Yes." Danny reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wrapped candy. He held it out to Rannick. "For luck. I always eat one before mission." Rannick looked at the tiny offering. It seemed foolish. Luck was not real. Skill and strength decided battles, not candy. But something in Danny's open face made him take it anyway. "Thank you," Rannick said. The drop ship landed hard, and the doors opened onto a gray wasteland. Dust lived up to its name. The air was thick with fine particles that made visibility poor. Perfect conditions for an ambush, Rannick thought, but humans probably did not consider such things. He was wrong. Sergeant Webb moved the team through the canyon with careful precision. She used hand signals to communicate. She positioned scouts at every turn. She moved like a predator, not prey. The depot appeared ahead, a cluster of metal buildings built into the canyon wall. Rannick counted the guards. Only 12. This would be simple. The assault began perfectly. They hit the depot fast and hard. Rannick cut through the first line of Sketh defenders with all four arms working in deadly harmony. His blade sang through the air. His scales deflected enemy fire. He was magnificent. Then the ground exploded. Hidden tunnels opened all around them. Sketh soldiers poured out like insects from a disturbed nest. Not 12 enemies. Not 50. Hundreds. They had walked into a trap. Fall back to defensive positions. Webb shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos. Rannick positioned himself between the humans and the advancing enemy. This was what he was made for. A living shield. An unbreakable wall. He would protect these fragile creatures with his body that he fought beautifully. Each swing of his arms took down another enemy. His armor absorbed hits that would have killed any human. He was death itself, and the Sketh learned to fear him. But the humans did not stay behind him. They fought beside him, shoulder to shoulder, back to back. They moved as a unit, covering each other, calling out threats, working together like parts of a single machine. When one fell, another pulled them to safety while continuing to fire. Then Rannick saw something that stopped his heart. A Sketh grenade sailed through the air and landed next to a wounded Drellian soldier. The soldier could not move. He could only watch the grenade with wide, terrified eyes. Sergeant Webb threw herself onto it. Rannick screamed. He tried to reach her, but he was too far away. The grenade exploded, and Webb disappeared in a flash of fire and smoke. For a moment, Rannick could not breathe. He had seen warriors die before, but never like this. Never for someone else. Never by choice. Then Webb stood up. Her armor was blackened and cracked. Blood ran from her ears and nose. She swayed on her feet, and Rannick could see that her left arm hung at a wrong angle. She should have been dead. She should have at least stayed down. She raised her weapon with her good arm and kept firing. "We do not leave until everyone leaves," she said through gritted teeth. Something changed in that moment. Rannick felt it spread through the entire unit like fire through dry grass. Every soldier, Human and alien alike fought harder. They fought not to win, but to protect the person next to them. They fought because Webb had shown them what was possible. The battle turned. Not because of superior firepower, not because of clever tactics. It turned because every single soldier on that moon knew with absolute certainty that they would not be abandoned, that someone would always come for them. The Sketh broke and retreated into their tunnels. The coalition forces held the depot, but the cost was high. 7 wounded, 2 dead. Rannick carried a human soldier to the evacuation ship. The man weighed almost nothing in his arms. So light, so fragile. Yet he had stood beside Rannick throughout the battle without flinching. Webb was the last aboard. She refused medical treatment until everyone else was loaded. Her face was pale from blood loss, but her eyes were clear. Rannick sat beside her as the ship lifted off. He wanted to say something, to ask her why she had done it, why she had thrown herself onto that grenade for a soldier she barely knew, but he could not find the words. Webb seemed to understand. She reached out with her good hand and patted his armored knee. "Welcome to Unit 77, she said simply. Rannick looked out the window at the gray moon falling away below them. He had come to this unit expecting to protect the humans. He had expected to carry the weight of battle on his shoulders. Instead, he had witnessed something he had never seen before. True courage. Not the absence of fear, but the choice to act despite it. The willingness to die for someone else without hesitation. He thought of Admiral Yenna's words. "Someday you will understand what I have given you." For the first time, Rannick wondered if he might. The mess hall was quiet in the evening hours. Most soldiers were sleeping or preparing for the next day. Rannick sat alone at a corner table, pushing food around his plate without eating. His mind kept returning to the battle on Dust, to Webb throwing herself onto that grenade, to the way every soldier had fought harder after seeing her sacrifice. Heavy footsteps approached his table. Goreth, the old Drellian, sat down across from him without asking permission. His massive frame made the bench groan in protest. "You have not slept," Goreth observed. "No. The first time is always difficult." Seeing what they do, Rannick looked up at the Drellian. Goreth had served with humans for 11 years. That fact had seemed strange before. Now Rannick needed to understand it. "Why do you stay?" Rannick asked. "You could serve anywhere. Lead your own unit. Command a ship. Why spend 11 years with humans?" Goreth was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer than Rannick had ever heard it. 15 years ago, the Sketh invaded my homeworld. We called for help from the Coalition. They sent what they could spare, which was not much. Everyone knew we would lose. Everyone knew my people would be enslaved or killed." He paused, his massive hands flat on the table. One human battalion volunteered for the mission. They knew they would not survive. They came anyway. They held the evacuation corridor while our civilians escaped. For 3 days, they held it. Rannick leaned forward. 3 days? Against the Sketh horde. When their ammunition ran out, they fought with knives. When their knives broke, they fought with rocks. When the rocks were gone, they fought with their bare hands. Goreth's eyes were distant, seeing something far away. 87 humans died on my world. They had never seen it before. They did not know our language or our customs. They died for our children anyway. The words hit Rannick like a physical blow. He had heard stories of human courage, but he had assumed they were exaggerated. Myths told to make weak creatures seem strong. "That cannot be true," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I was there. I watched them die. I carried their bodies to the ships so they could be sent home to their families." Goreth looked at Rannick with something like pity. "Tell me, young warrior, what other species would do such a thing?" Before Rannick could answer, other soldiers began drifting toward their table. Word had spread that Goreth was telling stories. Veterans from a dozen different species pulled up chairs and benches, forming a loose circle around them that a Kathrani pilot spoke next. Her feathers were streaked with gray, and one of her wings was mechanical. "I was flying escort for a refugee convoy when we were ambushed. My ship was hit. I was going down. My human wingman flew his fighter directly into an enemy cruiser to give me time to escape." She clicked her beak softly. "His name was Robert. He had 3 children. He never met his youngest daughter. A Morvian medic with 6 arms raised 2 of them. I serve on a hospital ship during the siege of Penthos. The Sketh were using biological weapons. Everyone was dying. A human squad held the main door for 6 hours while we evacuated the patients. 6 hours. They sang songs to keep their spirits up. By the end, only 2 of them were still alive, and both were badly wounded. Did they survive? Rannick asked. One did. He lost both legs. When I visited him later, he asked me if everyone got out safely. That was his only concern. More stories followed. A human who had carried a wounded comrade through enemy territory for 2 days without sleep. A human medic who had stayed behind during an evacuation to treat alien soldiers she had never met. A human commander who had ordered his troops to safety while he stayed behind to cover their retreat. Danny Okonkwo appeared at some point during the storytelling. He sat at the edge of the group, listening quietly, eating another piece of candy from his endless supply. When there was a pause in the stories, Rannick turned to him. Why do your people do these things? Why do you risk so much for species not your own? Danny looked genuinely confused by the question. His young face showed no understanding of what Rannick was asking. What else would we do? Danny said simply. They were counting on us. The words were so plain, so obvious, as if the answer was the most natural thing in the universe. Rannick thought about his own training. He had been taught to value strength, skill, personal glory. He had been taught that honor came from victory in battle, from defeating enemies, from proving his worth. But these humans measured honor differently. They found it in sacrifice, in protection, in choosing to stand between darkness and those who could not defend themselves. The gathering broke up slowly as soldiers drifted back to their bunks. Rannick sat alone again, thinking about everything he had heard. After a while, he stood and walked to the medical bay. Webb was there, sitting up in bed despite the doctor's orders, reading mission reports on a tablet. Her arm was in a regeneration cast. She looked up when he entered. Rannick, something wrong. He did not know what to say. He stood there for a moment, feeling foolish, until Webb patted the chair beside her bed. Sit, she said. That Saturday, they did not speak. Webb went back to reading her reports, and Rannick simply sat with her in silence. It should have been uncomfortable. It was not. For the first time since arriving at Forward Operating Base Sentinel, Rannick felt like he understood something important, something that words could not capture, that he thought of Admiral Yenna again, of her mysterious smile when she had spoken about getting him this assignment. Someday you will thank me, she had said. Rannick looked at the small human woman beside him, reading reports instead of resting, already planning the next mission, already thinking about how to protect the soldiers under her command. Someday was coming faster than he had expected. 3 months changed everything. Rannick no longer counted his kills or polished his medals. He no longer cared if others noticed his skill in battle. He had learned to fight for something more important than glory. The other aliens in Unit 77 noticed the change. They saw how he positioned himself to cover his teammates instead of charging ahead. They saw how he waited for orders instead of acting alone. They saw how he had become part of the unit instead of a warrior who happened to fight beside them. Webb noticed too. She never said anything directly, but sometimes Rannick caught her watching him with a small smile. Then a new soldier arrived. His name was Torek. Young, proud, and angry. A Valorian warrior fresh from the academy, sent to Unit 77 just as Rannick had been. His scales were bright blue, unmarked by battle. His 4 arms moved with restless energy. Rannick recognized everything about him. The stiff posture, the barely hidden disgust, the certainty that assignment to a human unit was an insult. These creatures are supposed to be my commanders, Torek said loudly in the mess hall, not bothering to lower his voice. I have trained for 10 years. I'm the finest warrior of my generation, and they send me to serve under beings who break if you squeeze them too hard. Rannick's scales flushed dark purple. He stood from his table and walked toward the young warrior. His hands tightened into fists. Gorith caught his arm before he reached Torek. The old Drellian shook his massive head slowly. Let him speak, Gorith said quietly. Let him watch. Let him learn. Then judge. Rannick wanted to argue. He wanted to grab Torek and shake him until the arrogance fell out. But he remembered his own first days here. He remembered thinking the same things, believing the same lies. Fine, Rannick said, but he fights in my fire team. I will watch him personally. 3 days later, the orders came. A major offensive against the Sketh Dominion. Their target was a fortress world called Grimm's Landing. The enemy had built a massive defensive line there. Breaking it would turn the tide of the entire war. The briefing room was packed with officers from every species in the coalition. Maps covered the walls. Data scrolled across screens. The scale of the operation was enormous. General Harris, a human with gray hair and tired eyes, outlined the plan. The main force would assault the enemy's front lines, while a smaller unit flanked from the east. The flanking maneuver required holding a narrow mountain pass for at least 4 hours. The pass is the key, Harris explained. If we lose it, the flanking force gets cut off. The entire offensive fails. He paused and looked around the room. I need volunteers for the pass. This will be the most dangerous position on the battlefield. Survival is not guaranteed. Every human in the room raised their hand immediately. Not one hesitated. Not one looked around to see if others were volunteering. They simply raised their hands as if the decision required no thought at all. Rannick watched Torek's face. The young Valorian's eyes went wide with confusion. The alien commanders shifted uncomfortably. Some raised their hands slowly. Others looked away. The contrast was painful to witness. Webb stood up. My unit will hold the pass. Harris shook his head. Diana, you just got out of the medical bay. Your arm is barely healed. Then it will heal faster if I have something to do. A few people laughed. Harris did not smile. He studied Webb for a long moment, then nodded. Unit 77 holds the pass. Pick your team. That night, Rannick found Danny Okonkwo sitting alone outside the barracks, looking up at the unfamiliar stars. The young human was holding something small in his hands. Rannick walked closer and saw it was a photograph that a woman with Danny's same bright smile stood with 2 small children. A boy and a girl, maybe 5 and 7 years old. They were standing in front of a small house with a garden. Your family? Rannick asked. Danny nodded. My wife, Anna. My kids, Paolo and B. They live on Earth Colony 7. I have not seen them in 8 months. Are you not afraid? The pass will be dangerous. Danny looked at the photograph for a long moment. Then he carefully placed it back inside his helmet and stood up. Fear is not the problem, he said. I'm afraid every time. Everyone is afraid. But those children in that picture will grow up safe because someone stood watch over them. Someone has to stand between them and the darkness. That is worth being afraid for. He smiled at Rannick, the same easy smile he always wore. Besides, I have never held a mountain pass before. Sounds exciting. Rannick stared at the young human. Danny was not brave because he felt no fear. He was brave because he felt fear and chose to act anyway. He was brave because he loved something more than he feared dying. The photograph was everything. The answer to every question Rannick had asked since arriving at this base. Why did humans sacrifice themselves for strangers? Why did they fight so hard for species not their own? Because somewhere they all had photographs. Somewhere they all had people waiting for them to come home. And they fought to create a universe where everyone's photographs could stay safe. Rannick looked up at the strange stars and thought about his own world, his own people. He had no photographs. He had no family waiting for him. He had only his medals and his pride, for the first time, that felt like poverty instead of strength. I will see you at dawn, Danny said cheerfully. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we make history. He walked back into the barracks, leaving Rannick alone with the stars and a new understanding of what courage truly meant. The assault on Grimm's Landing began at dawn. Fire rained from the sky as coalition ships bombarded enemy positions. Drop ships descended through clouds of smoke and ash. The largest offensive in a decade had started. Rannick fought with the main flanking force while Webb led her team to the mountain pass. He had tried to volunteer for the pass instead, but Webb had refused him. You are needed here, she had said. The main force needs warriors like you. We will hold the pass. That is our job. So Rannick fought in the valley while his friends climbed toward death. The enemy was waiting for them. Sketh soldiers dug into fortified positions, supported by heavy weapons and air support. The coalition forces pushed forward meter by bloody meter. Rannick moved like a machine, his four arms working in perfect rhythm, cutting through everything in his path. But his mind was on the mountain point 2 hours into the battle. The first report came through the radio. Enemy reinforcements dropping from orbit. They are hitting the pass hard. Request immediate support. General Harris responded. Support unavailable. All units engaged. Hold your position. Webb's voice came through clear and calm. Understood. We hold. Rannick fought harder. He pushed deeper into enemy lines, trying to end this battle faster, trying to free up soldiers who could help the pass. But the Sketh were endless. For everyone he killed, 2 more appeared. 3 hours. The radio crackled again. Heavy casualties at the pass. Enemy numbers estimated at 20-1. Request permission to retreat. Harris paused before answering. Retreat would expose the flanking force. Can you hold? A long silence. Then Webb's voice, steady as stone. We hold. Rannick heard explosions through the radio. He heard weapons fire and shouting. He heard humans calling out positions, sharing ammunition, encouraging each other. No screaming. No panique. Just soldiers doing their job. 4 hours. The flanking force finally broke through the enemy line. The main Sketh defensive position crumbled. Victory was close. Pass team, status report, Harris demanded, static. Then a voice Rannick did not recognize. This is Corporal Davis. Sergeant Webb is down. We have lost 60% of our force. But we are still here. We hold. 5 hours. The battle ended. The Sketh retreated. Grimm's Landing belonged to the coalition. Rannick did not celebrate. He commandeered a transport vehicle and drove toward the mountains as fast as the engine would allow. Gorth came with him. Neither spoke during the journey. The pass was narrow, barely wide enough for 2 vehicles side by side. Perfect for defense. Perfect for a last stand. Rannick saw the bodies before he reached the main position. Coalition soldiers scattered across the rocks. Some still clutched their weapons. Some had died reaching for fallen comrades. The main defensive line was worse. The humans had built barricade from anything they could find. Rocks, broken equipment, bodies. When they ran out of materials, they had used themselves. Rannick saw soldiers who had clearly thrown themselves in front of shots meant for others. He saw soldiers who had died holding hands. Webb was alive. Barely. She lay against a boulder, her uniform soaked with blood, a medic working frantically over her. One of her legs was gone below the knee, but her eyes were open. Rannick, she whispered when she saw him. Tell me, did the flanking force get through? Yes, we won. She smiled and closed her eyes. Good. That is good. The medic looked up at Rannick with tears streaming down her face. She refused evacuation 3 times. She kept fighting until she literally could not stand anymore. Then she directed the defense from the ground. Rannick walked through the battlefield in a daze. So many dead. So many who would never see their photographs again. He checked every face, dreading what he would find. He found Danny near the eastern edge of the pass, where the fighting had been worst. The young human was still alive, but only barely. His chest was torn open by shrapnel. His blood soaked the ground beneath him, but he was not alone. His hand gripped the hand of a Kathrani soldier who lay dead beside him. A soldier Danny had barely known, a stranger from another world. Danny, Rannick said, dropping to his knees. Danny's eyes fluttered open. Recognition came slowly. Then that familiar smile spread across his face, weaker now, but still bright. Rannick, hey, he coughed, and blood appeared on his lips. Did we hold? Yes. You held. The pass never fell. Good. Danny's grip on the dead Kathrani's hand did not loosen. She was scared. At the end, I did not want her to die alone. Rannick felt something break inside his chest. Something he had carried his whole life without knowing it. Pride. Arrogance. The belief that strength was measured in kills and glory. It shattered like glass and fell away. The medics are coming, Rannick said. Hold on. Danny shook his head slowly. The movement cost him something. Tell Anna, I love her. Tell Paolo and be that their father stood his ground. Tell them, I was not afraid. Tell them yourself. You will survive this. But Danny was already looking past him, looking at something Rannick could not see. His smile grew peaceful. Content. We held, he whispered. Then his hand went limp, and the light left his eyes. Rannick knelt in the blood and dirt of the mountain pass, holding the hand of a human who had died holding the hand of a stranger. He did not move for a long time. When he finally stood, he reached into Danny's helmet and pulled out the photograph. Anna and Paolo and B smiled at him from a world far away, that he would deliver the message himself. He would look into the eyes of Danny's children and tell them their father had been the bravest warrior he had ever known. Around him, the rescue teams worked in silence, carrying the fallen to waiting ships. Humans and aliens together, united by sacrifice, bound by blood. The pass had held. The cost was beyond measure. 1 year later, Rannick stood in the same military courtroom where his journey had begun. The room looked different now, smaller somehow, less important that he was no longer a warrior waiting for orders. He was training commander for all Valorian soldiers assigned to human units. The highest honor his people could give to someone who served alongside other species. Today, a young Valorian stood before him. Blue scales, forearms rigid with tension, eyes burning with the same anger Rannick remembered feeling so clearly. This assignment is an insult, the young warrior said. I graduated at the top of my class. I have won every combat simulation, and they send me to serve with humans? Creatures who cannot even survive their own planet without technology. Rannick let him speak. He let the anger pour out, remembering how good it had felt to say those same words. How righteous. When the young warrior finally fell silent, Rannick walked to the window and looked out at the stars. What is your name? He asked. Serac. I stood where you stand, Serac. 1 year ago, in this very room, I said the same things, felt the same fury. He turned to face the young warrior. I was the greatest fool in the galaxy. Serac's scales flushed with confusion. I do not understand. Let me tell you about a mountain pass, Rannick said. Let me tell you about a young human named Danny who carried candy in his pocket and a photograph in his helmet. Let me tell you what I learned about honor. He told the story, all of it. The battle on Dust, the stories in the mess hall, Grimm's Landing, the pass that never fell. Danny's last words, spoken while holding the hand of a dying stranger. Serac's anger faded as Rannick spoke. His rigid posture softened. By the end, his eyes were wet with tears he was trying not to shed. Humans do not fight harder than us, Rannick concluded. They do not have better weapons or faster ships. What they have is something we cannot copy. They believe with every fiber of their being that the life beside them is worth their own. Every single life. Without exception, the door to the courtroom opened. Admiral Yeno walked in, moving slowly now, supported by Kane. Her scales had faded to pale white, but her eyes still held that sharp intelligence Rannick remembered. I see you are continuing my work, she said with a small smile. You knew, Rannick said, when you assigned me to the humans. You knew what I would find. I knew what you could become. But knowing is not the same as becoming. You had to see it for yourself. She looked at Serac. Just as this one must see it for himself. Yenna moved to stand beside Rannick at the window. Together, they looked out at the stars. I spent 40 years serving in the Coalition before I ever fought beside humans, she said quietly. Those years feel empty now, wasted on glory that meant nothing. My only regret is that I did not find them sooner. Serac stepped forward. I would like to apologize for my earlier words. They were spoken in ignorance. Rannick shook his head. Do not apologize to me. Go to the humans. Fight beside them. Learn what they have to teach. Then come back and teach others. 3 months later, Rannick traveled to the Coalition homeworld. He had been invited to the dedication of a new memorial. The garden was beautiful. Trees from 100 different worlds grew side by side. Flowers of every color filled the spaces between them. At the center stood a wall of black stone, polished smooth as glass. Names were carved into that wall. Thousands of names, all human, all soldiers who had died protecting species not their own. Rannick walked along the wall, reading the names. Some he recognized from the stories he had heard. Robert, the pilot who flew into an enemy cruiser. The soldiers who held the hospital on Penthos. The 87 who died on Gortha's homeworld. And there, near the bottom of a long column, he found the name he was looking for, Private First Class Daniel Okonkwo. He reached into his uniform and pulled out the photograph. Worn now, the edges soft from handling. Anna and Paolo and Bea, smiling in front of their house with the garden, he had kept his promise. He had traveled to Earth Colony 7. He had looked into the eyes of Danny's children and told them their father had been the bravest warrior he had ever known. Paolo had asked if his father had been scared. Rannick had told him the truth. That Danny had been scared every time. That everyone was scared. But Danny had fought anyway because he loved something more than he feared death. Bea had asked if her father was a hero. Rannick had said yes. The greatest hero he had ever met. Anna had simply held his hand and thanked him for coming. For telling them. For remembering. Now Rannick placed the photograph at the base of the wall, beside the flowers and tokens left by countless others. He did not need to carry it anymore. Danny's family knew the truth. Danny's memory would live on. A small voice spoke beside him. Why are so many of the names human? Rannick looked down. A young alien child stood there, her species unfamiliar to him. Her father stood behind her, watching the wall with reverent eyes. The father knelt beside his daughter. Because when the darkness came, they stood between us and the night. They always have. They always will. The child considered this for a moment. Are humans not scared of the dark? They are terrified of it, the father said. But they stand there anyway. Rannick walked away from the wall, leaving Danny's photograph in its place of honor. He passed soldiers from a dozen species, all paying their respects, all understanding what this wall represented. He thought about Serac, training somewhere with a human unit right now, learning the same lessons Rannick had learned, becoming something greater than he had been. He thought about Webb, retired now, teaching young officers at the academy, still fighting in her own way. He thought about Admiral Yenna, who had given him everything by sending him to a place he had not wanted to go. And he thought about Danny. Sweet, cheerful Danny with his candy and his photograph and his simple answer to impossible questions. What else would we do? They were counting on us. Rannick looked up at the sky of the Coalition homeworld. Somewhere out there, humans were fighting. Somewhere out there, they were standing between darkness and light. Somewhere out there, they were dying so that others could live. Fighting beside them was not a duty. It was not a punishment. It was not even an honor. That it was a privilege. The greatest privilege in the galaxy. Rannick whispered the words into the wind, knowing they would find their way to wherever Danny had gone. We held. And somewhere in the universe, he liked to believe, Danny smiled.